I'm Manuel Smith, the president of the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists and an assignment editor at NBC 10 News in Philadelphia. And just really, it's my pleasure to welcome you guys all here this evening. I, along with a few members on the panel and a few more members of the PABJ board, I think you guys are here. Will you stand up with me if you guys are here? Sharon Flanagan is here. Charlene Horn is here. Ernest, Owens, and Vincent Thompson are on the stage. So when we were elected by the 130 members of the Association of Black Journalists here in Philadelphia, one of the first things that we decided would be an agenda item is to put the issues of the African American community on the forefront of the next election. And that really kind of morphed into this. So really thanks to a number of partners, which you guys see mentioned on the screen, and I'll talk about them a little bit later, and also the Community College of Philadelphia, we were able to put this form on in 4 months' time. Our foremost sponsor in helping to make that happen was the Community College of Philadelphia. And so I wanted to offer Dr. Guy Generals, the president of the Philadelphia Community College, an opportunity to offer a few words. Dr. Generals, thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome to Community College of Philadelphia, your city's college. We want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. We are honored to have the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists with us this evening, hosting a community forum for Democratic mayoral candidates. Civic engagement is a vital part of our mission. At CCP, we challenge students to address the problems facing our city and to become a part of the solution. This year, they have tackled issues ranging from opioid addiction to human trafficking to hunger to combating hate. Our nursing students provided health education to underserved populations. Our students in the dental hygiene program staffed a free clinic that provides free teeth cleaning to those in need. Our Institute for Community Engagement and Civic Leadership has organized voter registration drives. In fact, if you want to participate in the May 21st primary, very important, today is the last day to register to vote. The Institute has computers set up outside, and it doesn't take long. I want to again thank the members of the PABJ for hosting this important community event and for giving our students an opportunity to serve in key roles, which allows them to learn more about journalism, media, and production. Thank you. Please join me in recognizing the members of the PABJ. Please give them a round of applause. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Rhea Santos, a student at Community College of Philadelphia, who also will extend a welcome. Rhea, please give her a round of applause.
Good evening. I am thrilled to have been called upon to speak about my work on campus tonight when it comes to voting and increasing student engagement, specifically for the 2018 midterm elections and the upcoming mayoral elections. I became involved with pre-election initiatives through my work for the Institute for Community Engagement and Civic Leadership. Michelle Lopez, my boss, and I, as an administrator and student worker at the college, had the pleasure and opportunity to collaborate with the Campus Election Engagement Project, Next Gen America, and Vote That John as a fellow advisor to increase voter registration among young voters, specifically college students, for the most recent midterm elections. Over the course of 3 months, we held tabling events to register students. We visited multiple classrooms totaling 255 students spoken to. We also held office hours and a debate watch, all dedicated to increasing and nurturing new as well as old voter knowledge. Having grown up in a household where politics, morals, and the legality aspects of being an American were talked about, my interest and understanding of voting and voting rights were watered at a tender age. I was able to take pleasure in going to the polls with my mother, knowing that one day I would be able to do the same thing she was demonstrating, her American right. Prior to working with the Campus Election Engagement Project, I was under the impression that voter knowledge was something everyone possessed, but I was mistaken. When it comes to student opinion on voting, the amount of voter apathy I witnessed was shocking. To be aware of the percentage of students who did not care about voting, understand that voting does in fact matter, and simple things like registering to vote prior to voting was necessary for me to approach conversations and know how to gauge where these thoughts and feelings came from. Standing here in front of you all, I would like to take a moment to give you some insight on a young voter's mind. Being that I'm in a room full of politicians, journalists, and some older civilians, I am sure you understand that first-time and younger voters are some of the most important Americans to show up on Election Day because they represent the freshest voices making their wishes for a future that affects them directly in many cases, but do not understand that their vote does in fact matter and can make a change even if it's in the slightest bit. They are easily swayed by disappointment and lack of knowledge, and it is your job to make voting for young people comfortable. Aggression, finger-pointing, and bias swaying helps no one. I was extremely happy and content with the statistics shown last year regarding the midterm election. So many students I made contact with prior to Election Day made sure to tell me about their voting experience, the first for many. With over 300 students registered under my watch, I am proud to say that I am a part of the change around voter knowledge, inclusivity, and turnout on the college's campus. Thank you.
It's amazing to see students with passion like that. Before we move on to the program tonight, I do want to thank a number of sponsors who made this event possible. Again, this was a dream for us to be able to address and pull this forum together for the community. I put a call out for help to make this happen, and the following folks kind of came together and said, hey, Manny, we will make the resources available to do what you need to do. They include the National Black MBA Association of Philadelphia, the National Association of Health Service Executives, Delaware Valley Chapter, the Parkside Journal newspaper, the Philadelphia Sunday Sun, the Barristers Association of Philadelphia, and Hishimu Jaramogi of Jaramogi Communications, along with the members of the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists. If we can give them a round of applause for supporting tonight's event. Lastly, to make one other quick point, even though I have the fortune to work at a mainstream broadcaster, all of our panelists tonight, as well as our moderator, these are all independent journalists. And so while the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists will always maintain the fight for diversity and equity in our newsrooms, we are also working hard to ensure that there is an adequate minority ownership of our stories and the content about the stories that are told about the people in our community. So I am really proud to introduce you to tonight's moderator, Ms. Andrea Lawful Sanders, again, an independent journalist, but a columnist at the Philadelphia Sunday Sun.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Good evening, and welcome to the Pennsylvania Association of Black Journalists Democratic Mayoral Primary Forum. This is the first time all three gentlemen are sitting on a stage together, if I'm not mistaken. I am Andrea Lawful Sanders, and I will be serving as your moderator this evening. A couple of housekeeping rules. This forum will be aired live on WURD and Facebook Live with other media outlets. We ask that once you get settled, you remain in your seats because the event is exactly 1 hour long, and we want to get as much in as possible. This event is for the citizens of the city, and therefore we should make every effort to be clear and concise and answer the questions beyond the average sound bites. We need to know your platforms clearly so that informed decisions can be made. Stories and anecdotes are nice, but tonight we need information that goes beyond the pale. 3, we recognize that in this forum, in any forum, there may be those who may not like what we hear in some form or fashion. We are asking that instead of berating, belittling, and heckling, and screaming, that you take what you heard here tonight and use that to make an informed decision in the voting booth. These gentlemen may opt to, with their people, to engage some of the audience afterwards, but that is at their discretion. To my right are the candidates who will introduce themselves shortly, but first allow me to introduce the panelists. In addition to newsroom roles we'll highlight tonight, all of our panelists are proud to be independent Black journalists, including myself, who own their own content and coverage of our communities. That is very important for us. Denise Clay is the co-host of Mark and Denise in the Morning at WWDB FM AM. Ernest Owens is a writer at large at the Philadelphia Magazine. Vincent Thompson is the political editor at WURD Radio. Didier Delfin, my favorite person because he's a student, is the editor, the student Vanguard newspaper, Community College of Philadelphia. As your moderator, I'm going to ask the first set of questions, but I have 3 more points that I'd like to make, 4 actually. Candidates. At no time will candidates direct questions to each other. The moderator will allow rebuttals in appropriate instances. Chimes will indicate when a speaker is over time. Lord have mercy. However, the moderator is the sole arbiter of timekeeping and conversation flow. Forum is specifically timed to be direct and concise. All participants are reminded to be mindful of timing and questions and answers. We're encouraging the audience to seek additional questions and context by interacting with candidates and panelists in follow-up articles and on social media. Okay, gentlemen, panelists, are you ready?
Yes.
Let's go. The first question I have is this. 2 of the largest workforce development agencies in Pennsylvania have stated as recently as March 2019 that criminal convictions are a major factor in keeping people in poverty. Knowing how important it is to ensure that our criminal justice system doesn't overreach and create a class of second-class citizens needlessly, how will you work with agencies in the criminal justice system to incentivize their commitment to sensible, hear me, sensible justice reform practices? The answer should not just be about the district attorney. If all they focus on is the DA, then they're missing a whole system of decision makers that impact reform. You should also understand that this city is using community through the work of the Defenders Association in all stages of reform, from pre-trial to pre-entry. The results are that community is holding people accountable better than the justice system's hammer. How will you invest in reform efforts that are working? Who would like to take that question first?
I'll start with it. In the civil rights litigation area, they have this concept known as bona fide occupational qualifications. So there are a lot of what you would call broad brush disqualifications to people who have been incarcerated that may not be, for example, it's virtually impossible to get a job in a school. Mm-hmm. Now, if there's some pre-existing sexual offender status, that's relevant. But if the offense was for larceny or perhaps even for car theft, that's not directly related to the type of hazard that would be encountered in that situation. And I think the city and the state ought to work to create those compartments so that we're not just on a generalized basis disqualifying people on a mass basis from governmental employment.
Okay. Anyone else would like to answer that, Mayor? Mr. Williams?
Well, we are actually doing that now, working with the MacArthur Foundation on the grant that they gave us, actually 2 grants that they gave us. We were successful in reducing our prison population by 40%. We have 3,000 less souls incarcerated in our county prison, and we were able to actually close the House of Correction, which some people thought we could never do. In addition, we've been working with our criminal justice partners, not just the district attorney's office, but also with the defender and also with the courts. This has a lot to say about what happens. We're working on eliminating cash bail. We're working on trying to reduce the number of fines and fees that people have to pay once they're out. Because I went to a job fair, and a young man was telling me a story about how he went to work, but his entire paycheck was eaten up by fees and fines that he was required to pay for. So eliminating those, making sure that the criminal justice system, one of the things we did when I was in council was we decriminalized the possession of marijuana, which was causing 83% arrests on people of color. Those arrest records stay with you forever. We used to have 4,200 people a year arrested on average. We're down into the low 200-300s now, and that's 200 or 300 too many. So those are things we've been looking at we've also been looking at reentry and how we deal with the people coming back to us, to our communities, and for training, drug treatment, and the like. So I think we've had a pretty comprehensive approach, working with our partners, working with the defender, working with the DA and the courts and the prison to assist.
Thank you. That is important. Hold on one second, sir. Mr. Williams.
Yeah, so we're going to start with the obvious. Stop and frisk will end. And any other version of it will stop it end. So we're going to stop arresting people in the city of Philadelphia arbitrarily and applying that as a standard. Second, we actually have, and I have the great benefit of being a state senator, so I've used that to ban the box. So when you go, apply for an apartment or your credit and things like that, we've actually applied that in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Most recently, Meek Mills, who's come home, and the whole story behind him and technical violations. It's my bill that's moving through the Senate right now, Senate Bill 14, on the issues of employment frankly, the city has fallen woefully short when it comes to that standard applied to the private sector. So we have to lead, certainly by example, by hiring those who are reentering society, returning citizens, as and many people use that term. But we have to have somebody who really understands that in a way that applies it to getting a job in the private sector. And so we're going to work with the chamber, as we already have. And so in a variety of different areas, employment, behavioral health, drug addiction, all those things are required when one person returns to our community, and as well as an opportunity to get a job. So the first is most obviously reforming the manner in which so many young people are arrested, and that's stop and frisk, leading to the fullness of having the opportunity to be employed in Philadelphia.
Could I clarify? I
Certainly.
didn't quite understand. Is the mayor saying that right now, anybody with a criminal
Mr. Butkovitz?
discharge?
Mr. Butkovitz, remember we said that we could not debate with each other. So if you have a question, direct it to me, please, and then we'll decide what we want to do with it.
Well, I'm trying to understand if the answer was, because I thought the question was, can somebody go and apply for a job at the city of Philadelphia tomorrow and not be barred because of their criminal conviction?
Mayor?
Yes.
Yes.
Matter of fact, we have a number of programs where we're reintegrating people into our workforce that formerly have been incarcerated in our vehicle fleet management department, our streets department, and the public property, parks and rec, and those.
Okay. Thank you. So speaking of stop and frisk, since we brought it up, there's been a lot of talk of ending it, which is a tactic used by police officers to make communities safer. It has had the opposite effect. Police have destroyed the trust with communities by this practice. The unnecessary interaction could lead to more serious incidents, and it contributes to the narrative that people in low-income neighborhoods are worthy of respect of their civil rights. How would any one of you, starting with the mayor, work to truly stop this practice?
We've been working since 2016 on reducing the number of pedestrian stops in the city, and especially those that are unconstitutional. In 2015, there were 251,000 total pedestrian stops in Philadelphia, and the bad stops, the unconstitutional stops, were 110,000. In 2018, there were 72,000 stops, and in 2018, there were 11,000 bad pedestrian stops. So we've reduced the number of overall stops by bad pedestrian stops since 2015 by 90%. And we are continuing to drive those numbers down till we get to a point where there are no unlawful pedestrian stops.
Okay. So where this is the case, excuse me, I have a follow-up question for the mayor. Where this is the case where they're continuing to have stop and frisk, what are you doing to continue to reduce that?
Well,
Because 98% of the times when people are stopped, they find nothing illegal with them.
Well, as a matter of fact, the number of stops we've reduced 90%. We're able to get 3 times as many unlawful guns off the street, even though we stopped less people. There are new rules for the police department that require discipline be meted out to officers who continually violate the law while they're stopping someone unconstitutionally. There are reporting requirements that we put in place with Commissioner Ross and his command staff that every officer needs to explain in writing why the stop was made and what the interaction was, and that we review those on a weekly basis. And continue to train in the academy, train in the district, and also make sure that if people are violating, continue their discipline.
Thank you. I'm getting signal from my timer. It's time to wrap up? Okay, my 7 minutes are up, so I'm going to go to the next panelist. If we have time to come back, we'll tackle stop and frisk. Of course, one of them may ask the same question again, okay? Hang tight. So next we have Vincent.
Hey, Andrea. Hi. I will follow up on the stop and frisk question. Mayor, you had the chance to answer it. To Tony Williams and to Alan Butkovitz, what would you do about stop and frisk knowing that stop and frisk is legal under Terry versus Ohio by the U.S. Supreme Court? So, you know, many police chiefs would say, I'm not going to get rid of this arsenal, this tool in my arsenal, since it's legal. If you become mayor, will you get rid of stop and frisk? And what if your police commissioner comes back and says, I'm not going to do it because I don't have to? I'll go to you, Tony Williams first, and then Alan Butkovitz.
So, you know, my grandma used to say, promise made should be a promise kept. 3.5 years ago, the gentleman to my right said he was going to end stop and frisk. He didn't say he was going to do stop and frisk light. He didn't say he was going to do another variation. He said he was going to end stop and frisk. And many people of color bought that. The reality is that it has not stopped, it has not ended, and so to me as mayor, there are other cities which do not use stop and frisk. as a means to reduce crime in their community. Frankly, that discourages the partnership that the community needs in terms of the process. Arbitrarily stopping someone without a standard allows, regardless of training, regardless of any version of it, does not make you understand anyone in this audience that I don't know, that I see, that my bias will not use it in my lack of understanding of another human being. So any version of it doesn't cut mustard. The bottom line is there's ways to use technology. In New York City currently, there's an app that allows us to see live shootings. Matter of fact, I think the mayor knows about it. They haven't paid for it. The reality is that crisis centers, old ideas as John Street and Benny Swan had, and that is crisis intervention. Those are methods that allow the community to hire folks who are in those communities, who've been a part of the problem, become a part of the solution, which will reduce the level of violence. And most importantly, about 12 years ago, I created something called an illegal gun task force. $5 million funded by then Vince Fumo, which I think at that time the mayor was working for. They took my idea, used it, and by the way, it was very successful until corporate took the money out of it. Those things I think police officers want, and that is certainly to be working in safety, but most importantly to be working in partnership. Policies like stop and frisk do not encourage partnerships with the police department and those who live in the neighborhood, and we have to have that.
Alan Butkovitz, issue of stop and frisk.
Yes, and stop and frisk means end it. And we'll end it on the first day. I don't have the experience of virtually all African Americans of being constantly targeted by police, but I did have that experience once in my life back in 1973 when there was a search for somebody known as the Northeast Rapist, and it all came down to a scraggly sketch of a white guy with straggly hair, was 5'7", and on that basis I was pulled over and checked, and I can tell you it was an absolutely terrifying experience. The idea that this is a routine experience for people just because they're of color and that it has some utilitarian value kind of misses the whole point. The mayor kind of went both ways on this subject. On the one hand, he's trying to take credit for reducing the numbers and saying we're going to work our way out of it, and while subliminally, at the same time, he says, by the way, with all the bad stops we had, we collected 3 times as many guns as we would have otherwise. So that's kind of a no but. It's relatively speaking, we won't do stop and frisk, but by the way, it's really a good practice. I think it is simply within what the Supreme Court has extended as a technicality to substantiate the generations-long predisposition and bias that African Americans are more prone to commit crimes and that they are suspect simply because of their race or the way that they look. And if the mayor had a real commitment on this issue, he certainly sounded like he had a commitment on it in 2015 when he ran for office. There were no ifs, ands, or buts then. He would simply do it instead of trying to rationalize and come up with an explanation about why this might be a good thing after all.
Mayor, I'm going to give you the opportunity to respond to that. I still have some time in my time, but I want to give you a chance to respond to that. And also, Senator Williams, I want to find out from you, what cities in the country don't do stop and frisk?
I didn't say that.
Go ahead. No, Mayor, I want you to respond, but then, Senator, I don't know of any cities that do.
I don't know of any. But there may be, but I don't know of any.
No, but I'm asking you to respond, Mr. Mayor, to what they've said about you in stop and frisk.
I don't understand your question.
My question is, the 2 candidates
I heard
have
what they
talked
said.
about you in stop
Yeah.
and frisk. Do you want to respond to anything that they have said?
No.
Okay. Let's talk about the issue of violence impacting the city. Gun violence is impacting many Philadelphia neighborhoods, especially African-American neighborhoods. Last year, in 2018, 351 people were the victims of homicide in Philadelphia. That's the highest one-year total in over a decade. That is more people than were killed in the city of New York, which has 8 times the population of Philadelphia. 1,400 people were shot in Philadelphia last year. As of April 21st, 104 people have been murdered in Philadelphia. That's a 22% increase compared to the same time last year. We had 1 person killed and 7 others that were injured during an Easter night shooting. The overwhelming majority of people killed in this city are African-American men. Now, Mayor, your administration released a blueprint in January called the Philadelphia Roadmap for Safer Communities to deal with this issue. It's a crisis. Everyone can agree with it. To all 3 candidates, what specific steps will you take to deal with this homicide crisis citywide once elected in the office? Mayor, let's start with you, then we'll go to Senator Williams and Alan Butkovitz.
Let me just say that one homicide is one homicide too many, and we deal with these numbers all the time as if somehow they're not human beings, and they're just statistics. I mean, there's a family associated with each of those numbers on that list, and I want to make sure we understand that that's what we're talking about. With our plan, we plan to appropriate about 36 million was the number to get into the neighborhoods with grants for folks and organizations that can have lived experience, who can communicate with our young people on the street. We have a pilot program out in Southwest Philly in the 12th District where officers are engaging young people on the corners and out on the street, offering help with job training and jobs. We placed 60 people in full-time employment since that program has started. We do have a gun problem in the state of Pennsylvania. We are not allowed to enforce our own gun laws. We have a law passed by the City Council that would require someone to report their gun stolen. And the legislature, the Senate, and the House preempted us. We're not even allowed to do that. I mean, it seems logical that if it would stop straw purchases, or at least curtail straw purchases, which wind up shooting people or killing people. And we'll continue to work with our education system to fully fund education the way it should be. And to get our kids on the right track and the right path. And when people come out, our Operation Pinpoint also is we monitor social media and the like. We identify young people that may be in danger of being shot or shooting someone, and we go out proactively, not aggressively, proactively, to interact with the family of those young people and to explain to them that we think that they may be in harm's way and we need your help. This is not just a police problem, it's an entire community problem. It's a health crisis, and we're working very hard every day to reduce those numbers and drive them down. We could use some help from the Commonwealth when it comes to our ability to police ourselves and to make sure that we have strict gun laws or sensible gun laws that we can enforce.
Okay, so I'm getting the time that the 7 minutes is up for for you, Vincent. Okay. For those of you who are not aware of who are panelists, to my immediate right is Senator Anthony Hardy Williams. In the middle is Mr. Butkovitz, Alan Butkovitz, and to his right is the mayor of Philadelphia. Okay. So we are now going to Didier.
Good evening. I am Didier Delfin, and I'm an upcoming. Let's try this again. All right. Good evening. I am Didier Delfin, an upcoming student with the Liberal Arts Associates at CCP, a young journalist, and the current editor-in-chief of the college newspaper known as the Vanguard. Let's jump right in. So my question is more so related to state funding. I believe one of the major reasons as to why you all are running and rerunning again is basically to advocate for residents wanting cleaner streets, fewer potholes, which is admirable. However, state cuts have driven tuition prices up the roof, forcing the average students to drown in debt. For the fiscal year 2017, states, universities, and colleges did not receive any funding at all. However, for the fiscal year 2018 to 2019, it rose from 3.7%. Now, my question is, although state funding is increased nearly by 50 million, which is like a 10% increase over 5 years, if elected, what certain procedures will you sustain colleges and university attendees to succeed academically?
Who would like to take that first?
Well, I'm trying to figure out, are you asking a state question or a municipal question?
Asking the question to all candidates, and if elected, what sort of policies will you put in place?
Put towards increasing funding for, I didn't understand the question, I'm sorry, I apologize.
That's okay, for colleges.
Okay, so I want to use my little bit of time to clean up the last part and then address your part. The issue of violence in Philadelphia is, and this frankly is what causes people like me to get up and get frustrated. We get babble. And most people here tonight look at us as elected officials and don't really feel that many of us really get what people are going through. The level of violence in Philadelphia is that almost categorically of Chicago. We're going to be the #1 city in America leading in homicides. With all due respect, I've heard people talk about the young people in Parkland, Florida. They repeat their individual names. I was proud to stand beside those folks who unfortunately lost their lives in the synagogue in Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh. They repeated their names. for the mayor to talk about the people who are losing their lives, I asked him, who's the last person who died in Philadelphia? Was it a man, woman, child, grandmother, drug dealer? Who was it? And most importantly, that $34 million, why are community groups coming to me today asking me to participate in a program releasing the funds? Because they're not spending the money with community groups. And in Philadelphia, everybody knows the truth is, community groups have intervened generationally. Going back to Benny Swan's, when Philadelphia was the #1 city in homicides with gangs in this country, before Crips and Bloods. Then Frank Rizzo even got it. And he funded a program that allowed people in neighborhoods and communities to do their own work. This ain't complicated, but it requires more than empathy, patting somebody on the head and saying, I'm sorry about it. It requires leadership and action. Since the mayor rolled out his plan, 94 human beings have died in Philadelphia. 94. Babble is not what we deserve. Leadership is what we deserve. Action right now is what we deserve. And if I'm mayor, we're going to declare a state of emergency, just like we did with the opioid crisis in this country. Remember the crack crisis that preceded the opioid crisis? It's shocking to us that the opioid crisis now captured the nation. Across this country, young black people are dying in record numbers, and it's a national epidemic, and frankly, no one's talking about it. And we're talking about the next election in President of the United States, not in Philadelphia, not if it can come through my hood. People wonder why people don't vote, because we do body counts, not human interaction. And if I sound annoyed, angry, frustrated, I am, because that's what our community feels. The pain every day. They don't want words, they want action. And they want that plan to be rolled out. With a $360 million surplus, I think we can afford $36 million tomorrow to support that program.
Well,
I got to answer the young man's part. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, as a matter of fact, the homicide rate in every other city in America is falling. In Baltimore, it's falling. In Camden, it's falling. In Philadelphia, it's skyrocketing. So this is not just some kind of national phenomenon. The mayor had his cabinet work on an anti-violence program for 6 months, and they came back with a program that virtually has no anti-violence in it. We have to do focused deterrence. We have to do jobs, which, by the way, I know of at least one program that the mayor cut because of its sponsorship last year, which would have involved about 30 youth jobs. We got it, and I think we got to create paid mentorships. We have a lot of people doing volunteer mentorships, and it's extremely important in how young people view the world and their self-esteem and all of that. But we also need to have protection for people. Operation Sunrise was a very, very popular program, getting the drug dealers off of the street corners, creating a corridor so grandmothers and mothers could get to the store without getting shot at. I mean, not only... There used to be a theory that the only people getting shot were the people who were up to no good. But there's a lot of people who are just bystanders who are getting killed. A 3-year-old boy in the last year sitting on his sofa in the house because of bullets flying through the window. That's what has to stop. And frankly, the proposal that the mayor has gotten behind on so-called safe injection sites takes us in the exact opposite direction, because it focuses exclusively on the people in addiction who really do need, who are unable to pull themselves out of this problem. They don't see the whole thing. But in Toronto, it required a 90 police perimeter around the injection sites, which would be a very large percentage of what Philadelphia's on-duty patrol officers are at any time. And it means the people who are buying heroin, which is not a legal product, it's going to be a magnet for the drug dealers to come near that area, and we're going to be bringing actually more violence and more homicides into the community. And that shows a
Mr.
lack of
Butkovitz,
sensitivity to what these neighborhoods are actually going through.
Okay,
I
so
understand.
no one answered the young man's question yet. So his time is now up, so give us a second, Let's see if someone else will tackle this. Denise Clay?
May I see your question?
Re-ask your question, Didi.
Oh, you want me to ask my question?
So
Okay.
his question was never answered. I'm
Yes,
wondering if
and believe me when I say I'm a little annoyed by that. But, should I just go ahead and ask one of my questions?
Go ahead, but I literally am coming back to make sure that they answer that
Right.
question.
Well,
Because education is very
how
important.
about if they do that first and then I'll ask my
Yes,
question?
thank you. Thank you. Anyone, just one of you, would answer his question, please.
Increased funding for colleges, correct?
Correct.
That's the
Now,
substance.
some of the points that you've mentioned earlier, mass incarceration, all of these, there is a student at Community College of Philadelphia who is in that criteria, who lives in that criteria. So what about college funding for these individuals who want a second chance, who want a better life for not only themselves, but also their children?
So the bottom line is that the mayor has decided that we need to put money in a rainy day fund, and it's raining right now. And in the place of community college, those of us at the Commonwealth are working to increase funding in this year's budget when it comes to community colleges. Locally, I'm not sure what is occurring. I do, and I'm quite clear that's a priority because, frankly, many of the students who graduate from public schools in Philadelphia go to community college, and they have to go to community college in order to prepare themselves for a four-year career. So as mayor, we would look towards supporting and expanding the programs in community college and, frankly, expanding the campus either through technology, that's satellite, or through, frankly, those corridors, and most importantly, after work, so that it fits into someone who has to work as well as the work schedule. So we would advance using technology, increase funding locally, and look towards more support from the Commonwealth.
Where's the funding coming from?
Well, the money in Philadelphia, apparently, we have money. The question is, what do we prioritize using the money on?
So
And
where is this money that you're talking about, so that the people in the audience
I got it.
can get
There's been a $1 billion increase in 3.5 years.
Okay.
So we're going to reprioritize some of that money. And there's a $300+ million surplus this year, and we're going to use some of that money
Okay.
locally.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Denise, for allowing him to
Oh,
ask
no
his
problem.
question. Your turn.
Well, here's my question. The police department has a contract coming up. It's been, I thought that they had literally just signed one, but I guess it's about to expire. As part of that contract, if any of you become the mayor of Philadelphia, will you demand that there's a section in it that includes talking about how to get rid of police officers who commit malfeasance? And another part of my question goes back to stop and frisk. We are all talked about stop and frisk. It even came up tonight. But again, without Terry v. Ohio being pulled out of the way, it's not, you can say you don't want stop and frisk all you want, but that's not necessarily going to happen. So the question I have is, are you going to have the city's legal department look at Terry v. Ohio and possibly have the city be a test case to get that particular law off of the books? Because you can say you don't want it all you want, but as long as that's there, and as long as the people who are actually running the police department, and we all know that's the FOP, are still in place, they're going to still use this. So if you could just take both of my questions, I'd appreciate it.
So we're going to start with the mayor and then do Mr. Butkovitz.
The question on pedestrian stops, I believe I've already answered, and we will continue to drive those numbers down. I'm very much confident in our police commissioner, who is a tremendous person, a very progressive leader of the department. I would like him to stay if he would like to stay, and we're going to drive those numbers down in that manner. 90% reduction isn't bad. It's not perfect, and none of us are. The second question had to do with the contract, with the upcoming contract. We have fired a number of police officers over the past 3 years for doing some pretty outrageous things. The way they get back is because state law is what it is. It's required. It's part of the state civil service regulations for police that allow police to appeal those dismissals. And because the arbitrators are selected, there's 3-panel arbitration, one by the city, one by the union, and then neutral. The neutral generally goes with the union, unless it's a really egregious case, which there has been some. So if we can get a change in state law that would allow us to fire more effectively and efficiently, we would do that. And we've done it, but we've been unsuccessful in many times in the arbitration process.
And Mr. Butkovitz?
I mean, it's nice to hear about maybe the state will change the law. You got to ask them, and you got to try to get it changed, just like you got to try to change on the uniformity clause on taxes, which is something that the mayor made a big deal about 2 years ago, and then dropped the ball at the last minute as it was coming up for its final passage in the legislature. He gave the police a generous contract. One of the principles of collective bargaining is you get something for giving something. The police got the ability to move outside the city. They got all sorts of things in that contract. They got a very good wage package. One thing that you have to do as mayor is you got to be a negotiator. And you got to make it a priority. Look, Ramsey, I think, did a great job on this stuff. He called people out when they were bad cops, and he did what he could to fire them, and nobody could naysay him. And now we have a situation where it's like we're only talking about the most egregious cases. We've seen cases where there have been hundreds of cases thrown out because of misconduct by detectives and by police who have this repetitive conduct, and it's just some kind of a joke. This is what we see from this administration all the time: high aspirational goals and failure on execution, actually doing anything about those problems. And the other question was about Terry versus Ohio. And I think the city, that's a minimum standard for the city to meet, not a maximum standard. The mayor of Philadelphia can say, we're just not going to do stop and frisk anymore, and the police commissioner is going to carry out. Look, when the mayor of Philadelphia says we're not going to make arrests for small amounts of marijuana, police department didn't say they agreed with it, but they followed it.
That's not the question I asked, Mr. Butkovitz. I asked, are you going to make the city a test case to get Terry v. Ohio off the books?
The only way I'd make it a test case is if I had them actively do something wrong and then somebody sued us. If I agree with the plaintiff, with the civil rights people that we shouldn't be doing it all, how can I make it a test case?
Aren't there enough cases happening right now that you could choose one?
What was that, Ann?
Well, are there enough other
Aren't
test
there
cases
enough
that won't
test
be-
cases available as we speak where you could choose one? And I'm going to give the mayor a chance to rebut because I see him asking.
Can I-
Hold on one second.
Was that question, if it was asked
It was
of me,
directed towards
yes,
you,
I
Mr.
would be an
Butkovitz.
amicus to those other cases. I would say the city of Philadelphia doesn't believe that we need the power to stop and frisk.
Okay, hold on one second, Senator Williams.
No, I'm fine.
You're good? Okay. Yes, sir.
Yes, we will go to court. The challenge is uphill, but the reality is that it is clearly in Philadelphia applied in a discriminatory pattern, and that's not by a politician's perspective. That's by those who've studied it. And that's why we're paying out millions of dollars every year in lawsuits that we have to pay for. So there is a basis for a challenge. But I have to revert to what Mr. Butkovitz said. You know, the mayor gets to pick his police commissioner. And the last time I ran for mayor, I talked about running for police commissioner, so I'm not going to talk about that tonight. But what I will tell you is that whoever's the police commissioner, there will be directives. And we will have an agreement about how to make the city safer, how to reduce crime, how to reduce homicides, and how we remove stop and frisk. That person follows the directive of the mayor, and the mayor should be held accountable for the fact that he's moving forward. So in that space, we can certainly find test cases, but more importantly, I'm not going to wait for a case. I'm going to actually apply what I say, talk to my commissioner, how we're going to make the city safer, talk about the ways we're going to do it without using stop and frisk. The issue of malfeasance. And so the reality is that, and I'm kind of surprised, I didn't know that that somebody was waiting on the state to redraft the law. I'm sitting there every day. I've never gotten any letter to my notice. No lobbyist from the city of Philadelphia came up to me and said, look, we got to do something about this contract. If that had happened, I would do what I've always done with FOP, and that is be forthright, transparent, and honest about my disdain for certain categories that police officers that are protected. And I will also tell you this, increasingly, police officers are disgusted themselves when they hear about some of the things that happen. I do not think that it is the big challenge that we have to have when it comes to negotiating a new contract when we're talking about some of the things that we consider to be in malfeasance, and frankly, even beyond that. So the conditions that some female officers have to deal with on a daily basis in Philadelphia to this date should be a part of a contract that protects them in their workplace. So workplace safety, the fact that some people are LGBTQ in the police department are discriminated against and frankly have to suffer through that, all have to be a part of a very public, open conversation with the next contract.
Thank you, Senator Williams. Denise, your time is up. Ernest?
Well, thank you.
Yes, hi. Hello. Hey.
Hey.
So I want to make sure these questions are answered succinctly, so please be concise. So my questions, the first one is, before I get into the question, you know, we have diversity issues that's been talked about in this administration, specifically with city employment. In this city, we have only 2.5% of businesses owned in this city are black-owned. Only 2.5 in the city are black-owned. Also, there's overrepresentation of white people in the city as majority of color. I don't say minority because black and brown people are the majority. White people are the minority in this city. And there's an overrepresentation of the racial minority in this city in city exempt jobs, which are under the mayor's purview. when we're looking at those numbers. So my question that I want to first direct to the mayor, and then either one of you two can answer following up in a concise way. What is your diversity plan for overqualified and super talented black people to work in the public sector?
Let me first identify. Can I first frame the situation that we're currently in? Of the 24,000 or so public employees in the city, 49.07% of them are African American, not people of color or other people of color, but African Americans themselves is half the workforce. If you take the cabinet only and look at that percentage, we can do better there. But on the rest of the government, people who head departments throughout the city and actually run the city, we have a great number of African Americans who are very, very qualified to be there, and I'm glad they're there. First thing we did was we appointed a chief diversity officer, Nolan Atkinson, who's a well-known lawyer who has studied this, looked at all the numbers, and put us on a track to get better, and we all need to get better. My police commissioner is African American, my commerce director is African American, my 2 city solicitors have been African American and currently are now. The prison commissioner is the first African American woman ever appointed by the city to run the prisons. I just signed a letter offering a job to, I believe, with the first African American water commissioner. Our streets commissioner is African American. Our behavioral health department chief, controlling $1 billion worth of contracts, is African American. And we can always do better. But we're moving in the right direction, we're doing the right things, and we also understand that when we vet somebody for a job, we have a diverse panel. So this bias doesn't seep into this diverse panel. If we don't, if we don't have a diverse pool of applicants, we repost the job till we have a diverse pool of applicants. So we put in a number of things.
African Americans, please.
African Americans, yes.
Well, I want to be clear. I want to make sure I fact check this. I'm not referring to all the city jobs. I'm speaking about under your purview.
Right.
So exempt employment are jobs that you can pick. Those are jobs that you can hire or that you have influence over, not the general jobs, not civil services, exempt jobs. And so you said 49% black. That's absolutely not right. 48% white, and then the rest of the numbers then downhill. There's 36% black, 48% white, even though the population is 34%. So the question I'm asking is that, and what I've been asking you, and there's been so much deviance, why is those numbers such an overrepresentation of white people in a city that is majority of color? Are black people not applying for those jobs? And if they're not applying, is that the reason why that you have to continue to hire an overwhelming number of white people for these exempt jobs that are not under the civil services? And that's under your purview, so that's no one else's fault. That's not Nolan Atkinson's fault. That's not any of the other black people that you named that you specifically appointed. You can name as many black people as you like as people you've appointed, but there's still more white people in your own cabinet and in your administration than people of color in a city that's 65% black and brown. So I'm trying to ask you again, why is there a hard time getting people of color? Because they're not all going to the private sector. They're not all super talented or overqualified. There are many black people in this city, some in this audience, who've applied for those jobs and have not gotten them, and white people have been hired over them. So I'm asking you, why is that the cause when you have ran a campaign? Your last campaign team was mostly white. You have people of color this time. Congratulations. But why has that not transcended in the numbers now, 3 years later? Why are we still with those numbers?
Well, you're counting the cabinet number, not the entire government number of people that I directly appoint, and I just gave you a list of those folks, and there are many more. So that's the answer to your question.
Can I get in here?
Sure.
I mean, first of all, I'm still recovering from the mayor's budget address this year. We said, imagine that we're in 2024 and we have leaped ahead in providing near parity in African Americans who have city contracts, while he has, at this moment, cut that by 2% by eliminating the largest African American contract in the city's history and by the subcontractors at Team Clean and at Scotland Yard. So this is just one aspect of a record of hypocrisy, of talking one way while actually executing the other way. At one time, the talk was, and we had very, very highly qualified African-American women who were under consideration to be director of the airport, which would have meant the power position. That got translated and switched around, so appointing one of them as deputy director of the airport was presented as, see, didn't I do a good job? the hiding behind civil service as some kind of excuse, trying to take credit for the fact that African Americans have had to depend for years on civil service tests because they got discrimination in the regular business world, and now they have a substantial critical mass at the civil service level, doesn't explain why, the mayor doesn't have a background in terms of having a lot of African Americans on his Rolodex. They're not in
So,
his
Mr.
comfort.
Butkovitz, I have a question for you.
Can I
I
answer
hear
a
what the
question?
mayor's
Well,
not doing. What
Well,
would
this
you
is my
do?
time. Hold on, this is my time to ask. I'm going to ask, get Williams to
Hold on
answer.
one second. I want you to answer his question, which is, what would you do differently?
I would do what I did in the controller's office, recruit and hire African Americans in leadership positions, and I would expect that it would be more or less in the numbers that they represent in the population. And I would make sure, as we made it a priority in the controller's office, that I took the first enforcement action against anybody for committing fraud in a minority contract. We took away $35 million in business. We did not participate in this kind of secret giggle joke like, yeah, we know that the numbers are supposed to be such and such, but we have a way of doing it otherwise. That was the first issue that I tackled as controller. That has been an issue that has been important to me throughout my public life, and I would continue to do what comes natural to me.
Right, we got time.
Okay, so we have a little bit of time
Yeah, I wanna give
left.
William a
Hold on
second.
one second, Ernest. I'll
Yeah.
give you some more time. Give me a second. So we have a little bit of time left, so I'm going to go back around with the panelists and let them have a little bit
do I
more
get to
time.
answer the
to-
question?
Yeah.
1 second. Let me let Ernest finish what he's doing.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you another 3 or 4 minutes, and
Thank
then
you.
we'll keep going, okay?
Yeah, I'll be quick. So I was asking specifically about a plan. So I guess from Kenny's end, we got to get better. I didn't hear necessarily a plan. If elected, what is the plan to address these diversity issues? Because if everyone thinks it's fine and we're making so much progress, 2.5% of black jobs, in a city that's 65% of color. Anyway, what is your plan?
So
have a
you got to look at my history. So you have to work at it. So elected mayor, the first thing you do is you create a transition team. That transition team should be reflective of the city of Philadelphia. That means all types of people. Certainly African Americans, women, LGBTQ, people of faith. So you lead with the most obvious. You have opinion shapers who know people if you don't know them, so that when you start taking in resumes for those exempt positions, you won't be caught up short with a history of not having a cross-section of human beings that represent the entirety of Philadelphia. So it's not a challenge to find these people because, frankly, between you and I, unfortunately, we have discovered since those unfortunate comments which were made that we can't find qualified black people because they're too overqualified, have rung out across the city, which, by the way, with all due respect, that's what points out the level of, and I apologize, I've lived with this for a long time. This is not about what people would describe overt racism. This is just about what happened at Starbucks. The insensitivity that some people who think they're good people have towards other people because they're biased. That's what's playing out today. To sit and have us talk about it without an apology is unacceptable to me. It's unacceptable. And the second thing is, and I don't mean any ill will of the mayor. I don't think he's a bad person. I just think he's not connected to this reality. To sit in and count off the black people as if they're sort of trophies, like that's my black friend, in front of us as a group is insulting. What you should be talking about is what you talked about. What is the plan to correct the imperfection? I don't think there should be anything wrong with criticism. People do make mistakes, they fall short. I just don't think they should be correcting them in a re-election year and not have a real plan other than sort of go around your friendly people that are of color and they pat you on the back and say you're not doing anything wrong. So I do have a plan, and it'll be a measurable plan that will be evidenced in our transition team, and you'll see the first day we hire people that there will be a cross-section of human beings across Philadelphia.
All right, we have 4 minutes left. I'd like to allow the student to ask one more question, because he only got one question answered, and then I'll go back to Denise and ask if she have one more question.
Thank you. As an attendee of CCP, the college offers many individuals opportunities to better themselves by offering certifications to become sort of an electrician, construction worker, and sometimes a GED as well. My question is, as Philadelphia being the biggest, poorest city in America and having a monstrous digital divide, students who are applying themselves here within those sectors, if elected, and that's for all candidates. What are some policies that you will put towards the city to have job offers available for these individuals?
Well, we have to, one, understand that some want a job, some people want an entrepreneurial opportunity. And in this city, when you have so many people of color, I think, frankly, we need to be offering revenue and support. So I've talked about a municipal bank in two categories. One, for those who want to get a mortgage, because we know that there's discrimination against young people of color getting a mortgage. And two, incentivizing them to come back to those corridors, business corridors in Philadelphia that are going to be repopulated. You know, malls are collapsing, online shopping is occurring, but those neighborhoods want to shop. So we want to first lead with, one, own their own destiny through supporting them through a municipal bank. Take our deposits and allow them to spend the money. Two, as was mentioned, a significant population of folks should be allowed to be hired in the government because it is a big part of our hiring process. Those who get any kind of funding, that means the educational communities, the hospitals, all need to be a part of a program that we incentivize, encourage, and frankly direct towards hiring relevant applicants. And so in that category and space, I think we have a real, beyond a job fair, we have a real opportunity for employment across Philadelphia.
I would say that Mr. Butkovitz, 1 second, please. Let me let the mayor answer, and then we'll get to you, okay? 1 minute, please.
We've been working with community college for the past few years. We've asked for an additional appropriation of $80 million for the school to help reduce costs and start new programs of certifications and licenses. A lot of what people come here for is the ability to walk out the door with something they can certify them to work at a certain job for a decent salary. We had to we got to get the strike settled with the teachers union, which we did very well because we didn't want the disruption in the education process and graduation to be interrupted. But community college is one of the mainstays of our workforce development program, and Dr. Generals does a great job here, and we're working with him every day to retool some of the courses so that people can come in and get what they need to get out and get a job.
Thank you. Mr. Butkovitz?
Yeah, the city needs to focus on a strategic basis on creating the kinds of high-paying jobs that could match people who've missed their high school diploma. Philadelphia is in a changing trade pattern in terms of the use of ports and has a tremendous opportunity, which the current mayor talked about 4 years ago, to expand port operations so that we can hire thousands of new longshoremen who have the capacity to earn $50,000 to $100,000 and don't even have to have a high school diploma, need to pass a urine drug test, show up for work, show up again for work, and be reliable. Secondly, who in Philadelphia, who in their right mind would begin a $500 million public works project like Rebuild and not use it as a battering ram to open up employment for African Americans in the building trades and in the construction industry? And yet that's what's happening. That's why Rebuild is not off the ground, because people like Council President Darrell Clark and Councilwoman Cindy Bass have noted that this is a tremendous opportunity that has slipped away. We've got a lot of infrastructure to do in Philadelphia. The schools, we got $7 billion worth of building in the schools. And the precedent ought to be that if we're going to have that kind of public spending behind it, this is going to permanently alter the relationship and open an avenue of access. They've even had a school, that the building trades used to say that they couldn't find qualified African Americans for apprenticeships. They had a charter school for the last 20 years. Devoted specifically to that. And that's still the excuse that comes back. When we're spending that kind of money, we ought to be able to get that kind of result.
Thank you, Mr. Butkovitz. So we're now at the 7:51 marker. You each have 2 minutes for a closing statement. Jojo will tell you when it's time. Senator Anthony Hardy Williams, you can go first.
I appreciate the opportunity to come before the grouping tonight, the organizers. We thank you all for having us. Look, the moment we started talking as public officials was the moment that we frankly started separating. So let me go this way. I'm 62 years old. I'm an African-American who lives in Southwest Philadelphia. I am a survivor of the gang violence of the 70s, and I'm also a survivor of cancer, pancreatic cancer, 9 years old. 9 years past. God is good. I know one thing. Time is precious, and we cannot waste it. It is lost in these spaces and times of things that all of us as Philadelphians want. We want clean streets. We want potholes fixed. We want a school in our neighborhood, a public school in our neighborhood that actually works for all children. So equitable application. We do not want gentrification to be a bad word. So those who are in fixed incomes and seniors, we don't want to be scared to death that we're going to be run out of Philadelphia because there's a broken assessment process in Philadelphia. We want poverty. If we're going to raise and spend $1 billion in 3.5 years more than the current budget, we should have made a mark on poverty in Philadelphia by now. And lastly, We're the poorest big city. We're becoming the dirtiest big city. We have dysfunctional public schools. We're now the deadliest big city in America. We will stop that under my administration. It is a sin amongst human beings for there to be such a stain on this city, and we have not figured out until a re-election cycle that we should have a plan to do something about it. This is not a political game for me. I'm just a guy who lives in the neighborhood in the row house he grew up as a kid. This is not political gain. I don't need to die with being mayor of the city of Philadelphia. It is that we can do better. We can do better, and we should do better. And under my administration, the things I talk about will not be revisited in 3.5 years. They may not be perfect, but there'll be a scorecard when the first 100 days, who I hire, contracts, the project labor agreements will be transparent, public, and inclusive. Philadelphia can do better and will do better. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Hardy Williams. Mayor Jim Kenney.
Yes, I'm asking for re-election because I think we've done a number of things that put the right trains on the track to go in the right direction. We have over 4,000 kids that have had a quality pre-K experience. We have 12, we'll soon have 17 community schools in our public school system. And the rebuild project, however delayed by the beverage industry in their lawsuit, is 64 projects that are ready to go or shovel ready to go, and we're in the process of doing that now. We've also created an opportunity for small minority-owned businesses within the rebuild to take on prime roles as prime contractors, as opposed to working for a large majority sub and then have to chase them around for their money. So we're reducing the number of projects down to 5 million that small minority contractors could take within the library system and within the recreation department system so that they can get a piece of the pie also. We are working with the building trades to train young people coming out of CTE schools in our public school system. And we have opened, we're opening soon, a marine training facility down at the Holt cargo system to train those new soon-to-be longshoremen. We've done better in our finances also. I know it's a $360 million fund balance. That's not enough for the rating agencies, and that determines how much money we pay in interest costs when we borrow. And we did put $90 million away in the rainy day fund because we have to weather a recession potentially down the road that we had a hard time weathering in 2008, 9, and 10, where we had to cut programs in the city, we had to cut programs in the schools, and I'd rather not go through that again. As far as paying for pre-K out of the general fund, we cannot sustain that because I've seen fund balances, again, 2008, 2009, 10, that went down under 20 million, close to nothing, and we can't sustain those programs that way. So we want to go back and continue doing what we've been doing and putting things in the right direction and paying attention to every neighborhood in the city.
Thank you, Mayor Jim Kenney. Mr. Butkovitz.
Yeah, we've talked about the homicide crisis. We've talked about the poverty crisis. There wasn't much time devoted to the gentrification crisis. First and foremost, this city shouldn't be putting all of its eggs in the real estate tax. Progressivism means you pay according to your ability to pay. We've had people in Grace Ferry and other neighborhoods like that around the city who've seen $500 to $5,000 increases in their taxes. We have virtually an admission from the Kenney administration that it was error-ridden in last year's assessment for about 1/3 of real estate taxpayers, and they have no intention of returning the money to people. That's a pretty good gig if you can get it. Do something, do it wrong, and then you get to keep the money. Where in the world does that happen? There's a provision in the state constitution that goes back to 1984 that recognizes that gentrification is a problem. People keep talking about the uniformity clause, which is a complicated tax idea to basically tell us to shut up and there's nothing to be done. People recognized when Society Hill was being built up that just living where you've lived before, you could be moved out of your neighborhood and your house. And we have the ability to either freeze people's taxes who've been long-term residents, put an inflation cap like 3% or 6% on them, and basically give uniform tax relief, except that the city's Kenney's 5-year plan last year said he thought he was going to get a 5% increase in real estate tax revenues. He actually got 11%. He wanted 16% until Darrell Clark stopped him. He doesn't really know how. He said we needed a tax increase because we wouldn't have enough money to make it through the next year, and at the end of the year, he's got a $400 million surplus that he's trying to figure out how to spend and telling us we still can't touch other monies. One of the problems is he just doesn't know, and the people around him don't know. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. They lost $33 million for a year. We need management in the city, and we need management with a heart.
Wow, with 30 seconds to spare. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you have had your first formal forum with all three gentlemen, Mayor Jim Kenney, Mr. Alan Butkovitz, Senator Anthony Hardy Williams. I want to thank you for listening and engaging in the process. I'd like to thank the esteemed panelists who are all doing very well as journalists doing their own thing and not buttoned down by anyone. So I'm really appreciative of all of that and your wonderful questions. I'd like to thank the Defenders Association for the questions that I had to give and invite you to stay around and join us for a session afterwards. Manny? Is Manny around? And we ended on time, 7:59. Manny, this is how we do things. Thank you so much for coming and joining us.